The dinner table smelled like pot roast and resentment, and I had been sitting in the driveway for 4 minutes before I finally made myself go inside. I want you to understand something about that night. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid of my mother or what she might say or what face my father would make from behind his newspaper. I was tired. The bone-deep, soul-flat kind of tired that doesn't have anything to do with sleep. I had driven 2 hours from Columbus to my parents' house in Dayton on a Sunday evening because my mother had called 3 times that week, and the 4th call would have come at 6 in the morning, and I know this because she'd done it before. I had a presentation on Monday. I had a client review on Tuesday. I had a lease renewal decision due by Friday that I hadn't told anyone about because it wasn't anyone's business. I was 29 years old. I was a licensed occupational therapist with a caseload of 22 patients and a supervisor who had already flagged me for a performance review that I was not, in fact, worried about. But my mother didn't know any of that, or she knew it and chose not to believe it. I was never fully sure which one it was. She met me at the door with her arms already crossed, which told me everything I needed to know about the temperature of the evening. "You look exhausted," she said. "Not hello, not come in, sit down, are you hungry?" "I drove 2 hours, Mom." "You could have moved back here. The commute wouldn't be an issue." I stepped past her into the hallway. My father was already at the table, which meant dinner was being served at 5:15 on the Sunday because my mother had decided it was 5:15 now, and the household adjusted accordingly. My younger brother was there too, sitting with his elbows on the table, scrolling his phone. He looked up when I came in and gave me the kind of nod that meant good luck. I'm staying out of this. I sat down. My mother brought out a dish. The pot roast was fine. The silence was not. It took her 11 minutes. I counted. "Margaret at church," she said, passing the bread, "told me her daughter just bought a house in Centerville. 27 years old." Said the girl put 20% down. I served myself carrots. "That's nice," I said. "I thought it was interesting," my mother said, "because you're 2 years older than her and you're still renting that apartment." My father looked at his plate. My brother found something fascinating on his phone. "I like my apartment," I said. "You like it?" She repeated it the way she always repeated things she found incomprehensible, slowly, like she was tasting the word and finding it wrong. "You pay what? $1,200 a month? 13? That's money gone. That's money you'll never see again. Margaret's daughter is building equity. She's putting down roots, and you're just renting," I finished. "Yes, you mentioned. I'm trying to help you." "I know." "I just think," she said, and here she set down her fork, which meant we had moved from commentary into formal proceedings, "that you need to start thinking about your future. You can't just float. You're almost 30. I was 29 and 4 months. But I had learned a long time ago that pointing this out did not help. What I did not say at that table while I ate pot roast and let her talk was that 3 weeks earlier I had signed a purchase agreement on a 2-bedroom condo in the Short North neighborhood of Columbus. I had put 22% down. My mortgage payment, once finalized, was going to be $60 less per month than my current rent. I had a closing date. I had a real estate attorney. I had already picked out which wall I was going to put the bookshelf on. I didn't say any of that. I said, "Can you pass the salt?" and let her believe whatever she needed to believe for one more dinner. The thing about growing up the way I did is that you learn to operate in 2 layers. There's the surface layer, which is the one your mother sees, the daughter who comes home for Sunday dinner, who calls back within the same day, who brings a bottle of wine she doesn't actually want to drink and sits at the table until the dishes are done. That layer functions fine. It causes minimal friction. And then there's the real layer, the one that has a savings account your mother has never asked about, a credit score she doesn't know, a career trajectory she dismisses when she knows about it at all. The one that made decisions quietly for years because the alternative was a conversation that would have cost more energy than the decision itself. I had been building the real layer since I was 23 years old. After college, when my mother assumed I would move home and save money, and I don't disagree that it was financially reasonable, I got a roommate situation in Columbus instead. Tiny apartment, 2 other girls, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that was technically a hallway. I worked my clinical rotation hours and picked up weekend shifts at a rehabilitation center and learned to cook things that required exactly 1 pot. I didn't ask anyone for money. I didn't tell my mother how close the margins were some months. By 25, I was on my own lease. By 26, I had started a Roth IRA, which I knew about because a coworker mentioned it once, and I went home and read about it for 4 hours. By 27, I had my emergency fund fully built. 3 months' expenses in a high-yield savings account that my mother did not know existed and had never asked about because she had already decided my financial life was a disaster area. That's the thing about being underestimated by someone who loves you. It is both the most demoralizing and the most quietly motivating experience I know. Every month I transferred money into savings. I thought about that dining room table. Not with anger, exactly, more like fuel. When I started seriously looking at property, I did it the way I did most things, methodically, privately, without telling anyone who would have an opinion before I had a direction. I looked for 8 months. I went to 11 open houses. I fired my first real estate agent because she kept showing me things I couldn't afford, and then suggesting I ask my parents for help with the down payment. I found a second agent named Terrence, patient, straightforward, entirely unbothered by my list of requirements, and we found the condo on a Tuesday evening in late September. I walked in and knew within 6 minutes. It sounds like something people say, but it's true. The layout made sense. The light came from the west. There was a small office nook off the bedroom where I could see my desk, my plants, the particular kind of quiet I had been trying to build for years. I stood in the kitchen and I thought, this is mine. I made an offer that night. And then I kept coming to Sunday dinners and I didn't say a word. The call started in November. I don't know what shifted exactly. Maybe my mother had a difficult week. Maybe Margaret at church had said something else about her daughter. Maybe it was just the season. There's something about November in Ohio that makes everyone in my family want to discuss what they're disappointed about. She called on a Tuesday to remind me that my lease was probably coming up for renewal. I told her I was aware. She called on a Thursday to mention that her friend Linda's son had just paid off his student loans, which was impressive, and wasn't it interesting that Linda's son had moved home for 2 years to do it? She called the following Monday to ask, in a tone I recognized as carefully casual, whether I'd thought about what I was doing next year with my living situation. Because the apartment market in Columbus was apparently very volatile and it might be smart to think about alternatives. What alternatives? I asked, even though I already knew. Well, she said, your room is still here. I keep it clean. Your father put a new lock on the window last spring. We could clear out the corner unit in the basement for an office space so you'd have somewhere to work. Mom, I'm just saying it's an option. You could pay down your loans. My loans are paid off. Silence. When did that happen? Last March. You didn't tell me. I didn't think it required an announcement. Another silence, the kind where I could hear her recalibrating, fitting this information into the story she already had, deciding what it meant for the narrative. Well, she finally said, that's good, but you're still renting. You're still just throwing money away every month, and I just think at your age. I stopped hearing the specific words at some point. I heard the shape of them, the familiar cadence. At your age. By now. You should have. Why haven't you? I had been hearing that cadence for 6 years and I knew it did not require active engagement. It required patience. I'll think about it, I said. That's all I'm asking, she said. I closed my eyes. My closing date was December 14. The conversation that changed everything happened at Christmas. I had told my parents I would come for Christmas Day. I had not told them I had moved into the condo 12 days before Christmas, which meant I drove to Dayton from my own home, my actual home, the one with my furniture and my dishes and the bookshelf on the west wall. I had spent Christmas Eve wrapping presents on my own kitchen floor while a candle burned on my own counter, and I had felt something I don't have a better word for than solid, like the ground under me had finally set. My aunt was there for Christmas. My mother's sister, Sandra, who I like genuinely and who has always treated me like a full human being. There were cousins. There was my grandmother, who is 91 and extremely sharp, and who said my name when I walked in like it meant something, which it did. The trouble started after dinner, in the way it usually did. The dishes were cleared, the kids had gone to the living room, the adults were sitting with coffee, and my mother was at her most dangerous. Fed, finished, with an audience. "Sandra," she said, in the tone of someone continuing a conversation that hadn't actually been started, "I was just saying to Ray last week that we might be getting a boarder soon." She said it lightly, like a joke. She was looking at me. My father stared at his coffee. Sandra looked from my mother to me, politely uncertain. "Oh?" Sandra said. "Her lease is up in January," my mother said. "We've talked about her coming home, saving some money. I thought she could take the basement room, we'd make it nice, put in a proper closet." "My lease is up," I said, "because I bought a place." I had not planned to say it then. I want to be honest about that. I had intended to tell them quietly, privately, without the audience of my aunt and 3 cousins and my grandmother, who had turned in her chair to hear better. But there are moments when the alternative, sitting silent while someone narrates a version of your life that has not been true for months, costs more than the conversation does. The table went still. My mother's face went through several things in quick succession. Confusion, first. Then a kind of reaching, like she was checking what she'd heard against what she knew. Then, and this is the part I've thought about many times since, something that was not quite happiness. "What?" she said. "I bought a condo in Columbus. I closed December 14th. "You," she stopped. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I'm telling you now." "But we talked," she said. "I thought you were going to come home. I thought we had discussed." "We discussed you wanting me to come home," I said. "I don't think we ever discussed me agreeing to it." Sandra pressed her lips together. My grandmother made a small sound that I chose to interpret as approval. My mother sat back in her chair. There's a particular posture she has when she's been surprised in a way she's not ready to process. Very still, very upright, working through it. She held that posture for a long moment. "How?" she finally said. "How did you afford it?" And that was the real question. Under all of it, that had always been the real question. Not "why didn't you tell me?" Not "I'm so proud of you." Not even "are you happy?" How? Because she had built a picture of my finances from the outside and the picture said I couldn't, and now the picture was wrong and that bothered her more than anything. "I saved," I said. "For a few years, I was careful." "You never said anything." "No," I said. "I didn't." There was nothing accusatory in my voice when I said it. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't trying to punish her. I was just stating a fact that happened to contain its own full explanation for anyone paying attention. She knew why I hadn't said anything. She just wasn't ready to say so out loud. The months after Christmas were strange. My mother called more, not less. But the texture of the calls changed. She asked questions she hadn't asked before about the HOA fees, about my mortgage rate, whether I'd had the heating system inspected. Practical questions? Cautious, with the quality of someone trying to update a map they'd been reading wrong. I answered honestly. I tried to be patient. I knew she wasn't doing it maliciously. That's the thing I've had to make my peace with. My mother is not a villain. She's a woman who was scared I was falling behind, and she expressed that fear as control, and she held it so tightly that she couldn't see the actual person standing in front of her. But there was a February dinner, the first time I had them over to the condo, which my mother had been trying to arrange since December, where something shifted. She stood in my living room for a long time without saying anything, walked to the window, looked at the street below, the neighborhood, the light that came from the west in the late afternoon. She looked at the bookshelf. She looked at my kitchen. "You made it nice," she said finally. "Thank you," I said. "The layout is smart, good use of the space." "I thought so." She turned, and I could see her working on something, choosing something. My mother has never been a person who apologizes easily. I grew up watching her communicate everything indirectly, through action, through food, through the particular way she would show up for you without ever naming the reason why. "I should have asked more questions," she said, instead of assuming. I looked at her. "I thought I knew what was happening with you," she said. "I thought I could see your situation and I was just." She paused. "I wasn't seeing it." This was for my mother a significant statement. I understood that. "I know you were worried," I said. I was. She turned back to the window. "I still am. I think I'll just always be." "I know. But I should have trusted you more." "I didn't say yes. You should have. I didn't say I told you so, or this is why I stopped talking to you about real things or any of the number of true things that would have cost more than they were worth. I said, 'I'm figuring it out, Mom.' I really am. And I meant it." And she nodded once, and that was for us a lot. The thing about doing something hard quietly is that the victory is also quiet. There's no moment of triumph with an audience. No dramatic reveal where everything is resolved at once. What you get instead is a Tuesday morning in your own kitchen, coffee from your own machine, light coming through your own windows, and the particular feeling of knowing that everything in the room belongs to you, not because you fought for it against anyone, but because you built it while nobody was watching. I think about the women in my life sometimes who didn't do that, or couldn't, who stayed because they didn't see the option or because the cost of leaving seemed higher than the cost of staying, and who are now in their 60s and 70s with the specific grief of someone who knows what they would have chosen differently. I see it in comments sometimes when I'm watching something online late at night. The 70-year-olds who write about regretting not leaving earlier, not trusting themselves sooner, not believing the version of their future that required them to disappoint someone they loved. I was 29 when I bought that condo. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I was just trying to build something real. But I'll say this, there is a particular and irreplaceable satisfaction in standing in a room that is yours and knowing that someone once sat across a dinner table and told you, in their own way, that you weren't capable of it. Not because you want them to have been wrong, not because you need them to know they were wrong. Just because you know. The bookshelf is on the west wall. It's full. Every morning when I make coffee, I can see it from the kitchen. And I think about how I picked out that wall before I even made the offer, before I even knew for certain it would happen, and how that moment of deciding, that quiet, private moment of yes, here, this is mine, was the truest thing I'd done in years. My mother came back in the spring, helped me pick out a rug for the entryway. Didn't say anything about Centerville or Margaret's daughter or rent being money thrown away. Just looked at colours with me and said the grey-blue one would make the space feel larger, and she was right, so we got the grey-blue one. It's not a perfect ending. We don't have those in real families. What we have instead is the slow recalibration of two people who love each other trying to see each other more accurately, and the grace to keep showing up while that happens. I own my home. I built it quietly, and I didn't need anyone's permission to start. There's a version of this story where I walk into that Christmas dinner and announce everything dramatically, the condo, the closing date, the 22% down, and everyone applauds and my mother apologizes on the spot and it ends cleanly. That version doesn't exist. Real life doesn't hand you clean endings. What it hands you is a grey-blue rug you picked out with your mother in the spring, and the quiet understanding that getting there took longer than either of you wanted. What I've come to believe, sitting with all of it now, is that the outcomes in my life have tracked almost exactly with the choices I made when nobody was watching. Not the dramatic moments, not the confrontations, the Tuesday nights when I transferred money into savings instead of spending it, the 8 months of open houses when it would have been easier to just renew the lease and stop trying. The decision, made very deliberately, to build something real before I told anyone it existed, because I knew that the act of building it required me to trust my own judgment more than I trusted anyone else's doubts about me. That's not stubbornness. I want to be careful about that distinction. Stubbornness is refusing to change when change is warranted. What I'm describing is something different, a kind of internal honesty that asks, do I actually believe in this, or am I just reacting? I believed in it. I had run the numbers. I had done the research. I had fired an agent who didn't take me seriously and found one who did. That's not stubbornness. That's knowing the difference between someone else's fear and your own reality. My mother's fear was real. I want to say that too because I think it matters. She wasn't inventing the worry. She had watched me move to Columbus with very little, and she had filled in the gaps in her knowledge with the worst-case version because that's what fear does. The failure wasn't malice. It was a failure of information, and underneath it, a failure to ask. She never asked me directly about my finances because I think she was afraid of what she'd hear. And I never volunteered it because I had learned by then that sharing a plan before it's real only opens it up to be dismantled. There's a cause and effect running through all of it that I find genuinely clarifying when I look back. The years I spent being disciplined about money, not glamorous, not impressive to anyone looking from the outside, produced a down payment. The down payment produced a mortgage. The mortgage produced a room with a bookshelf on the west wall. One thing followed from another because I kept making the next right decision, even when the next right decision was just not yet. Not this month. Keep going. I think about the women who wrote in comments about being 68-74, full of regret about staying too long, trusting themselves too late. I think about Sandra at that Christmas table, watching me answer my mother's question with facts instead of apology. I think about my grandmother turning in her chair to hear better. Doing the right thing by yourself, building with integrity, thinking clearly, and holding on long enough for it to matter doesn't make you selfish. It makes you someone worth betting on. I just wish more of us learned that before the regret sets in. I closed on December 14th. The bookshelf went up on the 22nd. I spent Christmas Eve on my own kitchen floor, and it was the best night I'd had in years.